We're going to start today by talking about the Enlightenment. And I want to offer one prefatory caution about any way of dividing up the history of ideas, any way of periodizing, if you like, the history of ideas, which is that there's no single right way to do that. And indeed, any way you do it obscures in some ways important things. So, for example, sometimes people divide up the history of Western political thought into the ancients and the moderns. And the ancients are thought to have certain characteristic preoccupations that change sometime around the 16th century with Machiavelli, or in the 17th century with some of the folks we're going to be talking about today. And so we get this picture presented that there's a fundamental difference between ancients and moderns. On the other hand, another way of dividing up the history of the tradition is between naturalists and anti-naturalists. So naturalists are people who think that understanding nature and understanding human nature is the key to political theorizing, whereas anti-naturalists look for something else, whether it's God's law or transcendental Platonic forms or something like that. And so we can have a division of the tradition between naturalists, who generally trace all the way back to Aristotle, and anti-naturalists who trace all the way back to Plato. It's not that the distinction between naturalists and anti-naturalists is better or more accurate than the distinction between ancients and moderns. It's just a different kind of distinction that highlights different features of these thinkers for different purposes. So I just say that as a caution, because now we're focusing on the Enlightenment as a characteristic move in Western political thinking that really starts in the 17th century and comes into its own in the 18th century. But I don't want you to reify that idea. These Enlightenment thinkers we're talking about do, in fact, have important points of continuity with medieval and ancient thinkers, some of which will come up in our discussions. Nonetheless, I think it's useful to focus on the Enlightenment as a distinctive turn in Western political thinking, and that's going to structure our discussion going forward. And the first three traditions we're going to consider in this course, namely utilitarianism, Marxism, and the social contract, are all variants of Enlightenment thinking. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of those traditions, I want us today to take a step back and think more generally about what the Enlightenment was, what this Enlightenment move is that I'm pointing to as setting the outer philosophical boundaries of these first three traditions that we're going to be considering starting next Wednesday.